The morning Craig Barton came to my door, the whole street went still. I heard his car first. The door slammed hard, the way powerful men slam things when they want the world to pay attention. His footsteps beat up my porch steps fast and certain. The knock that followed wasn't really a knock. It was a warning. My name is Daniel Harper. I am 63 years old. For the last 11 years, I have lived in a small house on Clover Street in the town of Milford. The roof leaks when it rains hard. The kitchen floor creaks near the sink. But this house is mine. At least, it was. Barton wore a pressed gray suit and carried a brown envelope. He spoke loudly enough for every neighbor within 3 houses to hear, and he made sure of it. Mr. Harper, he said, Crestfield Bank is formally notifying you that this property is in default. You have 30 days to vacate. I took the envelope. I said nothing. He glanced through my screen door at the medals hanging in a wooden display case on the wall. He looked at them the way men look at things they have decided no longer matter. Your service is admirable, he said, with a thin smile. But it doesn't pay a mortgage. My neighbors watched from their porches. Some looked away. Others stood perfectly still. Barton taped the eviction notice to my front door and walked back to his car without another word. That's when my neighbor Raymond leaned toward the woman beside him. He never talks about what he did overseas, Raymond whispered. But people used to come looking for him. Back inside, I moved slowly through the house. I opened the hallway closet and pulled out my old army duffel bag. It hadn't moved in years. I set it on the bed and began folding what I would take: 2 shirts, a pair of trousers, my shaving kit, and a Bible with a cracked spine. I wasn't angry. That seemed to surprise the people watching from the window. My younger neighbor, a teenager named Curtis, came to my door while I was packing. He was 15, serious for his age, and he looked at me the way young people look at something they don't yet have the words for. Mr. Harper, Curtis said, why won't you fight this? You can't just let them take your house. I thought carefully before I answered. Some battles don't need noise, I told him. The loudest man in the room isn't always the strongest. Curtis didn't understand that. He was 15. He believed strength meant raised voices. I used to think so, too, a long time ago, before I learned what strength actually costs. He watched me pack for a few more minutes, then left without saying anything else. When I turned back to the dresser, I opened the bottom drawer to pull out a pair of socks. That's when it happened. A photograph slipped from between 2 folded shirts and fell to the floor. I picked it up slowly. It was old, edges brown, colors faded. But the faces were clear. There I stood in full dress uniform, flanked by 2 high-ranking officers whose chests were covered in medals. Curtis had already gone. No one saw me slide the photograph quietly into my breast pocket. I did not see Craig Barton leave Clover Street, but I heard later what he said. His assistant, a young man named Felix, drove him between appointments. Felix told someone at the bank, and word travels fast in a town like Milford. According to Felix, as soon as Barton got into the car, he loosened his tie and leaned back with a satisfied look. That's done, Barton said. Simple case. Old man, no income, can't pay. We move in 30 days. Felix kept driving and said nothing. What Barton didn't mention to Felix, but what I would learn from another source much later, was the real reason Crestfield Bank wanted my property so badly. Clover Street sat at the edge of a planned commercial development. The bank already owned 3 lots on that block. Mine was the last piece needed to complete the land acquisition for a new shopping center. My unpaid medical bills had made me an easy target. A quiet man with no family, no lawyer, and no fight in him. That was what Barton believed. But back at the bank, as Felix pulled into the parking lot and Barton headed toward the entrance, one of the loan processing officers, a young woman named Ida, was staring at her computer screen. She had pulled up my full account record. Somewhere inside it, she had found my name attached to a separate document she had not expected to find. Ida looked up slowly. "Mr. Barton," she called across the floor in a careful voice. "Are you sure you want to proceed with this case?" Before I finished packing that afternoon, there was a knock at my back door. Patrice lived next door with her 2 children. She worked the early shift at a laundry 3 miles from Milford and walked home most evenings because her car broke down more often than it ran. That afternoon, the hood was already propped open when I stepped outside. She was standing beside the engine with grease on her fingers and a look that said she had already spent too much energy on something that wasn't giving back. "Daniel," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you today of all days. The kids have school in the morning and I don't have the money to." "Go inside," I told her. "I'll take a look." She started to protest. I was already walking over. It took about 40 minutes. The battery cable was badly corroded and one of the spark plug wires had cracked from the heat. I cleaned what I could and replaced the wire with a spare I kept in a box in my garage. When the engine turned over on the first try, Patrice covered her mouth with both hands. She pulled some folded bills from her apron pocket and held them out to me. "I can't take that," I said. "Daniel, please. Put it away, Patrice." She looked at me for a long moment. Then her eyes dropped to my right shoulder. My shirt had shifted when I leaned into the engine. She was looking at the scar. Long, deep, and pale, the kind that doesn't come from any accident. I didn't know what was happening at Crestfield Bank that afternoon. I only found out later, through Ida herself, who came to see me much further into this story. But here is what she told me. When Barton returned to the bank that day, he called a team meeting on the 3rd floor. He stood at the head of the conference table with a coffee cup in his hand, relaxed, already moving on to the next deal. "The Harper property is practically ours," he said. 30 days, clean possession. The man barely spoke. No lawyer, no argument, nothing. A few people around the table chuckled. "Another old man living in the past," Barton said. I almost felt sorry for him. He paused and smiled. "Almost." More laughter followed. Felix shifted in his seat and looked at the table. Ida sat at the far end of the room and said nothing. While Barton spoke, she had her laptop open and was scrolling carefully through a government military personnel database the bank used for background checks. She had typed my name into the search field before the meeting even started. Now she stopped scrolling. Her hand went completely still on the mouse. The results on her screen showed a short record, publicly accessible, but with large sections blocked out. Even the parts that were visible made something cold move through her. She looked at Barton, who was still talking and laughing. She looked back at the screen. In the field marked cross-reference flagged, her own name sat directly beside mine. After the meeting, Ida stayed behind. She waited until the conference room emptied, then turned back to her screen. The database record was still open. She read it again, more carefully this time, the way a person reads something when they are hoping they misunderstood the first time, but no they didn't. My name was there. My service number. My rank. Sergeant First Class, United States Army, retired. Most of the record was blacked out. That wasn't unusual for files like mine. But at the bottom of the page, in a small text block in the public accessible section, there was one visible line. Service member associated with Classified Operation Holloway Ridge, Kandahar Province. Further access restricted. Ida sat very still. She knew enough from her work to understand what that meant. Classified operations didn't appear in routine veteran files without reason. When they did, it almost always meant something significant had happened, something the military had chosen not to bring before the public. She opened the printing queue and sent the page to the private printer at the end of the hallway. Then she closed the database window and restored her screen to its previous state. She walked to the printer, folded the document carefully, and slipped it into the inside pocket of her blazer. She didn't show it to Barton. She didn't show it to anyone else. But she did not throw it away either. She sat at her desk for the rest of the afternoon with that folded page against her chest, trying to decide what it meant and what she was going to do about it. The morning I left Clover Street, I woke before sunrise. I made a pot of coffee and drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the yard. There was a bird feeder I had put up 3 summers ago. The paint was peeling off it now, but the birds still came every morning without fail. I watched them for a while, then I picked up my duffel bag, walked through every room once, and locked the front door behind me. A small group of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk. Patrice was there with her 2 children. Raymond stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. Curtis had his hands deep in his pockets and was looking at his shoes. 3 other neighbors I had known for years lined the fence in silence. Nobody said much. I don't think they knew what to say. I shook Raymond's hand. I told Patrice the car should hold for a few more months if she kept the coolant level checked. I told Curtis to stay in school. Then I picked up my bag and started walking. I didn't look back. There was no useful purpose in that. I knew a shelter 2 miles from Milford that took in people who needed temporary housing. I had helped them once with a small fundraiser. They had a cot. That was enough for now. What I did not notice, as I walked down Clover Street for the last time, was the dark vehicle parked half a block away on the opposite side of the road. It was a military-issue sedan. It had been sitting there, engine off, for a very long time. While I was walking toward the shelter, Craig Barton was standing in front of the cameras. I heard about it later from Ida and from the reporter who had covered the event. Crestfield Bank had arranged a small press announcement outside the Milford Municipal Building. Barton stood at a podium with a glossy rendering of the planned development mounted on a board behind him. He spoke about progress. About investment. About what Milford could become. This project will bring 300 permanent jobs to this community, he told the reporters. This is a straightforward land acquisition, entirely routine. He answered questions well. He smiled at the right moments. He was very practiced at this. A small group of local reporters covered the event. Most of them were focused on job numbers and construction timelines. But one reporter, a man named Neil Burrows, who wrote for the Milford Clarion, was doing something different. Neil had covered Milford for 12 years. He knew the streets, the names, the patterns. When Barton's press team had circulated the list of affected properties earlier that week, Neil had read through it carefully, the way he always read things. He had seen the address on Clover Street. He had seen the name attached to it. Daniel Harper. The name hadn't connected immediately. But something in his memory had snagged on it, a story he had read years ago, a short documentary he had half-watched late one night on a public broadcasting channel. He said nothing at the press event. But when he got back to the newsroom, he opened an archive search and typed my name into the field. I didn't know Neil Burrows existed until he found me. But while I was settling into a cot at the Milford Community Shelter, he was sitting at his desk with a growing pile of printed documents in front of him. He told me later what he had found, and I have no reason to doubt a single word of it. What surprised him was not how dramatic the story was, but how little of it had ever been told. A soldier's record that should have filled front pages had barely made a single paragraph in a regional military affairs brief, published 6 years earlier. The basic facts were these: during a deployment in Kandahar province, an American convoy drove into a planned ambush in a narrow valley. The unit was cut off from radio contact. Their commanding officer went down in the opening minutes of the attack. A sergeant took command. That sergeant led a counteroffensive that broke the ambush, coordinated medical evacuations under sustained live fire, and made sure every wounded soldier was extracted before the enemy could push forward. Not one man under his command was lost. The sergeant's name was Daniel Harper. What Neil also discovered, buried in a single line of a military affairs bulletin, was that Harper had declined a public ceremony for the commendation that followed. No press. No photographs. He had returned to civilian life without explanation. He had disappeared. Until now. Neil leaned back from his screen and looked at the Clover Street address again. The same man. He reached slowly for his notepad. The Milford Community Shelter smelled like floor cleaner and old coats. I was given a bed near the back wall, behind a row of folding dividers. I unpacked what I had, which didn't take long, and then went to ask the director if there was anything useful I could do around the building. The director was a short, round-faced man named Gerald. He looked at me with noticeable surprise. "You want to help," he said. "Most people who just lost their housing aren't exactly lining up to volunteer." "I have time," I told him. He put me to work in the storage room, sorting donated goods by size and category. I had done this kind of work before, in other places, with different stakes. My hands knew how to be useful without being told twice. I worked through the afternoon without speaking much. A few of the other residents nodded at me. I nodded back. Nobody asked me any questions, and I was grateful for that. By evening, the main room had filled with people coming in for the dinner service. I helped carry trays from the kitchen. I refilled cups. I wiped down tables. It was around 7 o'clock when I looked up from what I was doing. A man was standing in the entrance. He was older than me, with white hair cut short and a stiff way of carrying himself that I recognized before I could even see his face clearly. He had come in for shelter, it appeared, and Gerald was checking him in at the front desk. Then the man looked up. He saw me. He went completely still, like a person who has seen something they believed was gone from the world forever. His name was Walter Odom. I had not seen Walter in more than 15 years. The last time was in a military hospital in Germany, where he was being treated for a leg wound he had carried himself out of the valley on. He had refused to let anyone slow down for him. He looked older now. We both did. But his eyes were the same, steady and careful, the eyes of a man who had learned long ago not to look away from hard things. He walked toward me slowly and stopped about 3 feet away. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then Walter Odom, a man I had served with for 4 years and fought beside in the worst night of both our lives, brought his feet together and came to attention. He saluted me. Right there, in the middle of a shelter, in a room full of strangers eating donated soup, this old soldier raised his hand to his forehead and held it there without flinching. Something tightened in my chest. I reached out and put my hand on his shoulder. "Stand down, Walter," I said quietly. He lowered his hand slowly. His eyes were wet. "I looked for you," he said. After everything had settled. "I looked for a long time." "I know," I said. "I wasn't ready to be found." We sat together at the small table near the window. Walter talked quietly. He told me what had happened to the others from our unit, who was managing, who was struggling, who had built something worth having. Then he looked at me very seriously. "The others need to know you're here," he said. "They all need to know." I told Walter to say nothing. He nodded and said he understood. He kept his word that night. But the next morning, Walter made one phone call to an old buddy from our unit. He told him he had found me. He told him where I was and what had happened to my house. That was enough. Within 24 hours, one call had become 5. Within 48 hours, a veteran from our unit posted a short video on a social platform. He did not show my face. He did not name the bank directly. He simply sat in front of his phone and told the story in a plain, quiet voice: the ambush, the valley, the sergeant who kept every man alive, and then he said, "That man is sleeping in a shelter in Milford because a bank took his house." The video was under a minute long. By the second day, it had been shared more than 80,000 times. Comments kept pouring in, names of soldiers, their families, and people who had never served a day in their lives but who felt something shift in them when they heard the story. It carried weight the way only true things can. I knew none of this while it was happening. I was still sorting donated boots in the shelter storage room when Gerald came in with a careful look on his face. "Daniel," he said slowly, "there's something you should probably know." He turned his phone toward me. The share count had passed 100,000. I handed the phone back without speaking. Later, someone told me Craig Barton had seen the video. His reaction was a single word. Exaggeration, he said. 3 days after Walter made his call, a vehicle I did not recognize pulled up outside the shelter. It was a dark government sedan, the same kind I had noticed parked on Clover Street the morning I left. 2 men in uniform stepped out first. Then the rear door opened. The man who came out moved the way I remembered generals moving, deliberate, steady, like the ground itself was expected to hold firm beneath them. I was in the main room folding linens when Gerald came to find me. "There's someone outside asking for you," he said. "Military. High rank." I set down what I was holding and walked outside. The general was standing at the bottom of the shelter steps in full dress uniform. The medals on his chest told a story most civilians would need a reference book to interpret. His name was General Arthur Briggs. I had not seen him since a debriefing room in Germany, more than 15 years ago. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he offered his hand. "Daniel," he said. "General," I said. We shook hands the way soldiers do, firm, brief, honest. He looked slowly around the street. At the shelter behind me. At the neighborhood. At the distance between this place and what I had once been asked to do. Then he turned back to me with the kind of calm that only comes from years of carrying heavy things without setting them down. "I need to ask you one question," he said quietly. He paused, and the pause itself felt like it had weight. "Who forced Sergeant Daniel Harper out of his home?" General Briggs did not take his time getting to the point. The following morning, he met with Craig Barton in a conference room at Milford Town Hall. I was not present, but Gerald was. The general had asked him to attend as a witness, and Gerald told me everything that evening in careful detail. Barton walked in expecting a conversation he could manage. He had handled difficult meetings before. He sat down, loosened his jacket slightly, and waited. Briggs did not sit. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and looked at Barton the way experienced men look at problems they have already committed to solving. He spoke in a voice that was not loud and not soft. It was simply clear. He told Barton about Kandahar province. About a valley that didn't appear on any public map. About a convoy of soldiers who drove into a carefully planned ambush on a cold October night with no radio contact and no air support behind them. He described how the commanding officer was hit in the opening minutes of the attack. He described how a sergeant stepped forward and took control of a situation that had every reason to end in disaster. He talked about the counteroffensive. The medical evacuations carried out under live fire. The 6 hours it took before support finally arrived. The fact that not one soldier under that sergeant's command was left behind. Barton had started the meeting leaning back. By now he was leaning forward, both elbows on the table. Briggs stopped speaking and let the silence fill the room. Then he said, very quietly, "That man never asked for a single thing in return." He placed a photograph on the table in front of Barton. The photograph Briggs placed on the table was taken at a base in Colorado, 2 years after Kandahar. I was standing in full dress uniform. The man beside me was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What was taking place in that photograph was a private ceremony, no press, no crowds, no cameras beyond the one official record. I had made that condition very clear before I agreed to attend. The medal visible in that photograph was the Medal of Honor. Gerald told me Barton stared at it for a long time without making any sound. Briggs let him stare. He refused a public ceremony, the general said. He refused every interview that was requested. He came back to civilian life and asked for nothing from anyone. He fixed his neighbor's car. He volunteered at a shelter. And he paid another soldier's medical bills when that man couldn't afford treatment, which is the precise reason he fell behind on his own mortgage. Barton's face had changed entirely. Whatever certainty he had carried into the room was gone. "You evicted a Medal of Honor recipient," Briggs continued. "A man who deliberately stepped away from public recognition so that the families of the soldiers he saved would receive attention instead of him. Barton opened his mouth. He closed it again. He looked at the photograph one more time. Then he looked at Briggs. Gerald told me later he had never seen a powerful man look that small in a chair. Barton sat in silence for nearly a full minute. Then he reached slowly for his phone, his hand slightly unsteady. He already knew exactly what this story would look like by morning. By early evening, news vehicles were parked outside the shelter. I sat inside at the small table near the window and watched them through the glass. Camera lights burning white in the dark. Reporters speaking into microphones. A crowd on the sidewalk that kept growing larger. Gerald came to sit across from me. "Daniel," he said, "I think you need to go out there. People are asking for you." I sat with that for a moment. Then I got up, walked to the front door, and stepped out onto the porch. The crowd went quiet faster than I expected. Dozens of people, and then sudden stillness, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need one. "I want to thank everyone here for their support," I said. "I mean that sincerely. But I'm asking something of all of you right now. Stay calm. Don't go after the bank with anger. Don't make this about attacking Mr. Barton personally. That is not what this is about." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the back called out something I couldn't clearly hear. "If you want to do something useful," I continued, "find the veterans already living in your own neighborhood. Learn their names. Ask how they're doing before they reach a situation like mine." Then I went back inside. That night, a reporter asked several people in the crowd to describe what they had heard. Most of them said the same thing without coordinating their answers first. They had come expecting anger. What they got instead had left them more unsettled than anger ever could. Barton told me himself, much later, when we finally sat across from each other alone, that the walk back to his car after the town hall meeting was the longest he had ever taken. He had driven to Clover Street that same afternoon without telling anyone where he was going. He parked and sat looking at my house, the eviction notice still taped to the front door, rain softened by then, beginning to curl at the corners. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for. Maybe he hoped that seeing the house again would make the decision feel clean and correct. Routine business. No different from 100 other cases before it. But one thing Briggs had said kept coming back to him. He paid another soldier's medical bills when that man couldn't afford treatment. Barton is not a man who admits weakness easily. He told me this himself. But that evening, he went back to his office and opened my full file, not the summary version, the complete record, and read it from the first page to the last. He found the payment history. Large amounts were sent in careful installments to a medical provider in the state of Georgia. The patient's name on the account was Theodore Walsh. Theodore had served beside me for 2 years. When the diagnosis came, he had 3 young children and no insurance to cover what followed. I had the money then. Theodore needed it. I used it. There was nothing more to explain about that. When Barton set down the file, he sat in his darkened office for a long time. He didn't turn the lights back on. On a Thursday morning, 3 days after the town hall meeting, there was a knock at the shelter door. Gerald answered it. He came to find me in the storage room with a careful look on his face. "Someone is asking for you at the door," he said. "It's Barton." I set down the box I was holding. "Tell him to come in," I said. Barton walked into the shelter the way a man walks into a place he never imagined he would find himself. He looked around slowly, at the rows of cots, the folding chairs, the sorted clothing piled along the far wall. There were no cameras. No assistants. No gray pressed suit. Just a dark jacket and an open collar. He looked older than I remembered from my porch. I led him to the small table by the window. We sat down across from each other. Neither of us spoke for a while. I have never been uncomfortable with silence. I learned long ago that the right silence is more useful than the wrong words. Barton put both hands flat on the table and looked at them. I didn't know, he said finally. I waited. I'm not saying that excuses what happened, he added quickly. I know it doesn't. I didn't know. His voice caught slightly on the last word. Not dramatically. Just barely, the way a voice catches when something true is trying to get out and finds the space too tight. I looked at him across the table. The man sitting across from me was not the same man who had stood on my porch with a brown envelope and a thin smile. 2 weeks later, Crestfield Bank sent a written notice that the eviction order had been cancelled. They also released a statement announcing the creation of a new program, the Crestfield Veterans Relief Fund, offering zero-interest emergency loans and mortgage assistance to former service members facing financial hardship. The fund would be managed independently, with oversight provided by a veterans advocacy organization based in the state capital. Barton signed the documents himself. General Briggs attended the formal signing at the bank's main offices. Walter Odom was there. Ida was there. Raymond came wearing the only dress shirt I had ever seen him own. Patrice sent flowers. She couldn't get the time off work. After the signing was complete, I was asked if I wanted to say a few words. I kept it brief. This is a good step, I said. I hope it reaches people in harder situations than I was ever in. Then Briggs leaned toward me and said quietly, "Is there anything you want for yourself, Daniel? Anything at all?" I thought about it for a moment. I knew very clearly what I did not want. I did not want a ceremony. I did not want a newspaper photograph. I did not want a plaque or a parade or a room full of applause for something I had done simply because it needed doing. Help the next soldier before they reach my situation, I said. That's all. Briggs nodded slowly and made a note. Someone at the back of the room started to say something. Then thought better of it and stayed quiet. I moved back into my house on Clover Street the following Saturday. Raymond helped me carry things inside. Patrice brought food. Curtis helped me put the bird feeder back up, the one with the peeling paint, because I told him the birds would still come regardless of how it looked. And they did. Life returned to something like what it had been before. Early mornings with coffee at the kitchen window. The creak of the floor near the sink. The soft sound of the neighborhood waking up around me. Quiet things. Ordinary things. The kind that don't make the news and don't need to. About 3 months after I returned, the town council approved a small memorial at Milford Civic Park, a plaque honoring veterans from the area who had served without ever seeking public recognition. 12 names were listed on it. Mine was not among them. I had asked for that specifically. Raymond thought I was being stubborn. I told him I wasn't. I told him the plaque was for people whose stories still needed telling, and that mine had been told more than enough. He shook his head and called me a difficult man. I didn't argue with that, because here is what I have always known and will never stop believing: the ones who truly gave everything were not looking for anyone to know about it. They did what the moment asked of them. They carried what needed carrying. And then they came home and tried to live quietly. Because the greatest heroes never needed the world to know what they did. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that real strength rarely makes noise, please share it, leave a comment below, and subscribe so you never miss a story worth telling.